Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's episode of Advanced Bass Fishing, and really appreciate you guys joining me for today's video and spending some time with me. We're going to be talking about current today, how bass are affected by current, how you can use current to your advantage, and really go into a little bit of the misconceptions about bass and current, because from what I've seen, guys, there's a lot of people out there that they think that bass are victims of current and that they have to get out of the current, and I don't know, there's just a lot of misinformation out there, and I wanted to share with y'all some of my personal experience about, the times I've fished in current and how I've caught fish and the things I found to be true and not true. So we're going to get into that in today's episode. I'm actually heading right now, guys, heading up to Lake of the Ozarks. I got my practice period, we got practice today and half a day tomorrow for the tournament here. So been having to do these videos anytime I get a spare chance. I just drop the boys off at school and heading up there right now, so that's the reason I'm in the truck here. Also, guys, before we get started here, real quick, I just wanted to remind everybody, anybody interested in booking an on-the-water lesson with me, you can do that by going to my Facebook page, Randy Blaukat Professional Angler, and just shoot me a private message. And also, guys, big thank you to everybody that's been using all the links I put in the description, especially everybody that's been using and bookmarking that Tackle Warehouse link of mine for your fishing gear. It's really been helping the channel out, and thank you very much for that. Okay, guys, current and bass fishing. Now, whether you think it or not, or whether you realize it or not, everybody has to deal with current. Current is an issue in any body of water you fish, even if you have a lake that doesn't look like it has much current in it, because it does. For example, if you don't have something that creates natural current, like a water flow of different intensities, you still have current that is created in a lake because of wind. Wind creates current in any body of water. So even if you don't have an actively moving system, when you do have wind, you still have that same current element. And all current is not equal. It's because, you guys have been fishing, a lot of you guys that have been fishing enough to know that sometimes you're in a man-made lake and they're pulling some water and you have a little bit of current, and you can sit on the bank and you can watch like a leaf slowly drift downstream. And then other times, if you're fishing a body of water that has significant current, like if you're fishing some of the, say the Coosa River lakes in Alabama, or, any type of a river type system, you can have a very significant current. You can have a current like a 3 to 5 mile an hour current, which is ripping, and then everything in between. And this is part of the bass's environment, and they react to different type of current flows and how they use different type of cover. So this is one of the things I learned early on, guys, when I was fishing, is because when I first started bass fishing, I did a lot of creek wading. And one of the great things about learning to bass fish from learning from creeks is you have an understanding of how current affects bass. Because when you're fishing a creek and you're wading a creek, bass like to get in those current eddies, and those are usually the areas that have a little deeper water and a little bit more protected, and that's where you caught most of your bass. And that's one of the things, like a basic 101 bass fishing skill that I learned early on from fishing current, is that bass like to get out of the current a lot of times. But what I realized is, once I started fishing man-made lakes, I realized that's not quite as simple as it seems, because there's other factors involved. Now, when you're fishing a lake that has current in it, I consider two different type of elements. Number one, I consider how the current affects offshore structures like ledges and deeper points and that type of stuff. And then I see how the current affects shallow water cover. I mean, like, if you're fishing around docks or stumps or lay down trees or whatever, and bass will react differently to those structures, how they're positioned, along with the relationship of the intensity of the current. Now, here's one of the biggest things that I have found out about current and bass when you're dealing with some type of a significant current, is that bass, a lot of times, they will not visibly get out of that current. Now, let's say, for example, you got a lay down tree in the water, and you've got a fairly decent current coming through there, almost like where you pitch your bait up there and your bait will drift down a little bit. There's that much current in it. That's like a typical current that's found like on the Coosa River lakes. Now, most people would look at that tree and say, okay, the fish are going to be on the back side of that tree out of that current. And guys, a lot of times that's not true, because here's one of the things you have to understand about shallow water cover and current is you don't know what's under the water. You don't know how that cover is positioned underneath the water. And a lot of times there'll be current breaks underneath that water that you can't see. So therefore, one of the things that I have found out about fishing in current when you're dealing with shallow water cover, you know, whatever it is in the water, whatever type of shallow water cover, is you have to fish all around that cover, because sometimes it may look like, you know, the current's coming on the upside part of a piece of cover, but there's a little current break under the water you can't see. So I always try to fish around a piece of cover as much as I can. Now, don't get me wrong, you know, the little current breaks and eddies behind the currents are the higher percentage areas, but you never want to bypass any piece of shallow water structure with current, because you don't know what's down there. Now, the current, as far as on deeper water areas, like when you're fishing your ledges and your points and your drop-offs, most of the time you don't have enough of a current deep like that to have to force the bass to take on a different position. The thing that current does for the deeper offshore fish is it makes them more active. It activates the system. That's why usually anytime you hear a thing like they're running water in a lake, it's going to make that, you know, a little bit more productive on those offshore structures. But the main thing about current, what I want to talk about, are the techniques and how to approach the different types of current. Now, one of the things that I like to do is, if I'm fishing an area that's got some current in it, but it's not too bad, is I usually like to drift with the current when I'm fishing it. Now, this is a big deal, guys. Anytime that you can effectively fish with the current, you want to be with the current, because it makes you quieter. For example, you know, if you got just like some type of a moderate current in a lake, and you're trying to work upstream into that current, you've got your trolling motor on constantly. I mean, it's constantly whirling and buzzing. You can't take your foot off of it because you'll go backwards. And therefore, you know, the fish really know you're there. And a lot of times when you're fishing current, you're fishing close to the fish. So by drifting with the current, you're going to be a lot more stealthy, and guys, you get a lot more bites. Now, obviously, sometimes you can't do that. Sometimes the current is ripping so hard through there that you simply can't effectively fish by doing that, and you have to work into the current. So that's just something you have to deal with based upon, you know, the intensity of it. But if you can get by with it, try to float down with the current. That's a big part of it. Now, another thing is make sure that you identify when you're working down a bank that has a current. There's a lot of little things that can go on. It's like, pay attention to the structures, pay attention to any undercut banks, bends in the channel, anything that has a variation in the current. There's always going to be like an irregular feature on current that those fish position in. So, you know, keep that in mind. Now, the techniques as far as fishing in current, guys, for for me, most of the time, it's some type of a slow bait, like probably a jig or a creature bait is two of my favorite ones, and most of the time it's a jig. You'll find that on current situations, you know, they really like a jig, and normally I'll go with something that's got a little bit more weight behind it, like 1/2 ounce, 5/8 ounce jigs, 5/8 ounce Texas rigs. It just seems like to me that I can be a lot more efficient, and I can get that bait where those fish are at with a slow bottom bait than I can a moving bait. Now, if the current is not very much at all, you know, if it's a very moderate current, a crankbait can be really good, like a square bill crankbait or just a medium diving crankbait. Sometimes a topwater or a spinner bait can be good. Again, it depends on the intensity of the current. But if you gave me one bait, guys, the number one bait that I have caught fish around current is going to be some type of a heavy jig, you know, with just like a 1/2 ounce black and blue or 1/2 ounce green pumpkin, depending upon the water clarity. And it just seems like I get a lot more bites with that. So anyway, current is it's part of the environment of the lake. I mean, it's something that the fish live in every day. You're going to have to get used to fishing it. And like I said, most people don't pay much attention to it, because unless you live in a body of water, like you're fishing Neely Henry Lake or Lay Lake or Logan Martin Lake in Alabama, you don't deal with those massive current flows like you do in other lakes. Other type of lakes that have current in is like the tail races of some areas. Some of the places that have a lot of current on the upper end of the rivers or river sections. That's another thing about it. If you run up a river section in a man-made lake, based upon how much precipitation they have, there can be current on those upper ends too. But don't let it scare you guys. Like I said, I've caught a ton of good fish fishing current, and that's some of the things that I've learned about it. Here's the two biggest tips I can give you on current, guys. Number one, try to fish with the current if you can. And number two, make sure that you saturate a piece of cover all the way around the cover instead of just behind it where the obvious current break is. If you do those two things there, it just seems like your success will really, add up a lot more with that. So, guys, thanks for tuning in. We'll talk later.